In a galaxy full of powerful alien civilizations, one species always surprises them: humans. Here you'll find exciting HFY stories where courage, intelligence, and determination turn impossible situations into legendary victories. From intense space encounters to epic adventures, every story celebrates the unstoppable spirit of humanity. All stories are told in a natural human voice, not AI generated, for a more real and immersive experience. Subscribe to Can't Stop HFY. Now, let's start the story.
My people do not have a word for home. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest, because without it none of what follows will make sense. We are the Veil, and we have crossed more dead skis than there are stars in the one you were born under, and in all that crossing we have never once looked back at a world and felt the thing your kind feel. We are born in the dark between suns. We die there too. A planet to us is a husk you stop at, take what is useful from and leave. We shed worlds the way some creatures shed skin, and we do not mourn the skin. I tell you this so you understand what kind of creature was looking down at Ardenfield the morning I first saw the light. I was not built to be moved by anything I found there. That is the whole point of the story. Ardenfield was a farming world, the kind your colonists used to seed by the thousand in the old expansion years, before anyone had run the numbers properly. It circled a small orange star that the survey records listed as stable, and the records were wrong, the way records often are about slow things. The star was not stable. It was dimming. Not in a burst, not in any way that would have killed quickly and cleanly, but over generations, a candle guttering in a draft no one could feel. By the time the colony understood, the growing seasons had already begun to fail. The frost came earlier each year and left later. The fields that had fed 40,000 people thinned to fields that fed 20, then 10, then none. And so they did the sensible thing. They left. Ship after ship, family after family, lifting off that cooling ground for somewhere a sun still meant to live. The evacuation took 11 of your years to complete, and when it was finished the records were stamped closed. The world was marked abandoned, and the rights to strip whatever the colonists had left behind were sold to a salvage concern. That concern hired ships like mine. That is why I was there. I had come to take a dead world apart and carry the pieces away, and I expected nothing, because I had done it 100 times and felt nothing 100 times, and a Veil who expects to feel something on a husk has not been doing the work very long. We came down out of the long dark and into orbit, and my crew began the survey that always comes first, the slow sweep of the surface to map what was worth taking. The settlement sat in the northern temperate band, on the shoulder of a wide, shallow valley, and it was exactly what the records promised. Roofs furred with old snow, streets blown half full of drift. A grid of houses gone gray and a few larger structures at the center, a meeting hall, a power station, a water tower standing over it all like a thing that had forgotten what it was for. Cold everywhere. The kind of cold that has had years to settle in and call a place its own. I had seen 1,000 of them, and I logged it the way I logged all of them, and then the sweep passed over the eastern edge of the settlement, and my instruments returned a thing they should not have been able to return. Heat, a single point of it, steady, contained, deliberate, and folded inside the heat on the visual band, so faint that the analyst flagged it as an error before I overrode her, a light. One warm yellow light, burning in one window of one house, at the edge of a world that had been declared empty and sold for parts. I want to tell you what I felt, and I cannot, because at the time I felt nothing I had a name for. The Veil do not believe in things that should not be there. We believe in malfunctions, in survivors who do not know they have been left, in equipment running on dying cells with no one to switch it off. So I assigned the light a cause before I had any business doing so. A reactor fault. A heating unit stuck open. A beacon someone had forgotten. I told my crew we would land, log the anomaly, shut off whatever was wasting power, and proceed with the salvage. I told myself it was nothing. It was the single most human thing on the entire planet, and I had decided in advance that it was nothing. We brought the lander down in the white field east of the settlement, and I went out alone, because that is the privilege and the loneliness of command, and because some part of me, though I would not have admitted it, did not want a crew watching while I figured out what the light was. The cold took me the moment the hatch opened. Even through a suit it took me, a vast patient cold that did not bite the way fresh cold bites but simply leaned against everything, the way the dark between stars leans, the way time leans. The fields were frozen solid, and under the snow I could feel the old furrows, the long straight lines a plow had cut into this ground back when the ground still answered. They were still there. The land remembered being farmed even though nothing had farmed it in 20 years. I walked across the dead crop rows of a dead world toward a light in a window, and the only sound was my own movement, and the only living warmth on the whole face of that planet was the place I was walking toward. The settlement up close was worse than from orbit, because from orbit a thing is a map and up close it is a grave. The houses still had curtains in some windows. A child's sled lay tipped over against a porch, half swallowed by drift, and the sight of it did nothing to me. I want to be honest about that. It did nothing to me then. There was a shop with its sign still hung, the paint mostly gone, and a long low building that must have been a school, and everywhere the same silence, the held breath of a place that had been loved and then left, though I did not yet have the words loved or left in any way that touched me. I had the word abandoned. That was the only word I had brought with me. And then I came to the house with the light, and the door opened before I reached it, and a human stepped out onto the porch and looked at me without any surprise at all, as though he had been expecting me, or expecting someone, for a very long time. He was old. I knew enough of your kind to read it in the white of his hair and the deep folds of his face, and the careful way he held himself against the cold. He wore layers of worn wool and a coat that had been mended more times than it had been bought, and his hands, when he lifted one in a small, unhurried gesture I did not understand, were the hands of someone who had worked with them every day of a long life. He looked at me, a thing from between the stars, gray and many-limbed and nothing his world had ever made, and he did not flinch, and he did not run, and he did not raise a weapon. He said, "You'll be cold out there. Come in if you like. The kettle's nearly on." His name was Tomas Brennan. I would learn that soon enough. But what I learned first, standing in the doorway of the last warm room on a frozen world, was that I had been wrong about the light. Because the light was not a malfunction, and it was not a beacon, and it was not forgotten. It was lit on purpose. He had lit it himself, that morning, the way he lit it every morning, and he would light it again tomorrow. And the simple, deliberate fact of that undid every explanation I had carried down from orbit. The room behind him was small and clean and astonishingly alive. A stove burned in the corner, fed by wood he must have cut and stacked himself, since the power station had died years before. A kettle sat on the iron top of it, ticking toward a boil. There were 2 chairs at a small table, and 2 cups set out on the table too, though there was only 1 man on the whole of Ardenfield. There was a shelf of your paper books, and a window with a curtain drawn back, and in that window, on a sill worn smooth, sat the lamp. An oil lamp, old, its glass clean, its flame steady and small and gold. The light I had seen from orbit. The light a dying world had thrown up into the dark to be caught by the instruments of a creature that had no word for what it meant. He poured the tea when it was ready. He poured 2 cups. He set one in front of the empty chair without seeming to notice he had done it, the way a thing done 10,000 times stops being a thing you notice, and he sat down across from the chair that was not for me, and he gestured for me to take the other, and I sat, because I did not know what else a creature could do. "You've come for the salvage," he said. It was not a question. I told him I had. I told him the world was logged abandoned, the rights sold, the colony closed, and that he appeared in no record as a remaining resident, which meant either he had been left behind in error or he had stayed against the evacuation order, and that in either case my duty was to see him safely off-world before the work began. I told him this in the flat, clear way the Veil tell facts, because facts were the only ground I trusted, and I had a great deal of ground to make up. He listened to all of it, holding his cup in both hands for the warmth, and when I was done he nodded slowly, as if I had told him the weather. "That's about the shape of it," he said, "and I'll tell you the same thing I told the last ones and the ones before them. I'm not leaving." I did not understand. I want to be precise about the not understanding because it was total. It was not that I disagreed with him. To disagree, you must first grasp a thing and then refuse it. I had not grasped it. A world was ending. Everyone with sense had gone. Survival was a thing you carried in a ship to the next sun. That was the whole of what survival had ever meant to me and my people. The man in front of me had a ship's worth of reasons to leave, and not one I could see to stay, and he had set out 2 cups of tea, and he was not leaving. It was as though he had told me that water flowed uphill on this world and meant it, and was right. So I did what my kind always do when a thing will not fit the shape we have for it. I decided the shape must be wrong somewhere, and I went looking for the place it was wrong. In the days that followed, I stayed, you understand. I told my crew the anomaly required investigation, which was true in a way I could not have defended. In the days that followed, I built theory after theory to explain Thomas Brennan, and one by one he took them apart, not with argument, but simply by being what he was. My first theory was the obvious one, the greedy one, the one a salvager reaches for first. He had stayed to guard something. The colony had left treasure behind, machinery or stores or some hoard worth a man's life, and he was sitting on it, waiting to sell it or hide it or carry it off himself. It was the kind of reason a Veil could respect, a reason with weight you could measure. So I walked the settlement with him, and I let him show me what was there, and there was nothing. Rusted plows. Empty grain towers. Houses full of the cheap, soft things your kind fill houses with, none of it worth the fuel to lift it. He had not stayed for treasure. There was no treasure. There was a stove and a lamp and 2 cups and a world of frozen mud. That evening he lit the lamp again, and I asked him why, since there was no one on the planet to see it but me, and I would have come anyway. He looked at the small gold flame for a while before he answered. "Somebody ought to be home when it gets dark," he said. "That's all. A light in the window, so the place doesn't think it's empty." I logged it as the answer of a confused mind. I was still building theories then. I had not yet understood that he had just told me everything in 11 words, and that I would spend the rest of the encounter slowly arriving at the meaning of them. My second theory was that he was a criminal. Exile is a thing my people understand. We have left our own on husks before, when leaving them was cleaner than carrying them. Perhaps Ardenfield was his prison and the evacuation his sentence. Perhaps he stayed because he had nowhere a ship would take him. I asked him, more bluntly than I should have, whether he was a man who could not leave. And he laughed, a low, warm sound I had not heard a human make, and he said no, that he had a granddaughter on a green world 4 jumps from here who wrote him letters he could no longer answer since the relay had failed, and that she had begged him to come, and that the ships would have taken him gladly any year he asked. He could leave. That was the thing I kept stumbling over, the splinter I could not pull out. He could leave. The door was open. The door had always been open. He stayed with the door open. No exile stays with the door open. My third theory lasted the longest because it cost me the least to believe. He was simply old, I decided, and old minds break, and the breaking had fixed him to this place the way a damaged instrument fixes on a single reading and will not move. Madness. It is the explanation the comfortable always reach for last and cling to hardest, because it asks nothing of you. If he was mad, then there was nothing to understand, only something to manage. So I watched him for the signs, the way you watch a failing machine, and I found none. He kept the stove fed and the wood dry. He kept the lamp clean and the oil rationed. He read his books and remembered them. He spoke of his granddaughter's letters with perfect order and perfect grief. He knew exactly where he was and exactly what was coming and exactly what it would cost him. A mind that knows all of that and chooses anyway is not a broken mind. It is the most unbroken thing there is. I had been calling clarity a sickness because the clarity frightened me. And all the while, every evening the lamp, every morning 2 cups, every time I pressed him, the same 11 words or words near them, offered without heat, the way you state a thing that has stopped needing defending a long time ago. Somebody ought to be home when it gets dark. I began to hear it in the silence between his sentences. I began, though I did not know it, to wait for it. Then the cold deepened, and the clock I had been pretending not to watch ran out of patience. The star, you see, did not hold steady even on the scale of weeks. It dimmed, and I felt the dimming as a falling in the light through the window, a thinning of the day, a cold that leaned harder against the walls each night. My survey instruments had given the world a window, a span of weeks before the surface temperature fell past the point where even a lander could sit on it without its systems freezing. That window was closing. My crew, who did not understand why their commander was drinking tea in a dead man's kitchen instead of stripping a husk, sent word that the work must begin or the world must be left, that we could not stay forever orbiting a candle going out. And command, when I relayed the matter of the human, sent back the answer command always sends. The salvage rights did not include a resident. A resident was a complication. Remove the complication. If he would not come, we were authorized to take him by force, since a man cannot consent to freezing and his refusal could be logged as incapacity, and incapacity could be overridden, and the world could be cleared and the work could proceed. I had the authority to drag Tomas Brennan off his world. I want you to sit with that. I had it in writing. 2 of my crew and a restraint field, and it would have been done in an hour, and he would have lived, and his granddaughter would have had her grandfather back, and by every measure my people use it would have been the right and merciful thing. I went to tell him. I had decided on the walk over that I would do it. The cold made the decision easy. The cold makes every hard thing seem like sense. I came into the warm room and the lamp was lit and the 2 cups were out and he was sitting in his chair. And I told him plainly that the window was closing, that I could no longer leave him here to die, that I had the authority to take him whether he willed it or not, and that I meant to use it, because I would not stand on a world and watch a living thing freeze when I had a ship that could carry it to warmth. He heard me out. He always heard me out. And then he set down his cup and he looked at me with something I had no instrument to measure, something patient and immovable and unbearably kind, and he said, "You can do that. I won't fight you. I haven't the strength left to fight anything. You could carry me up to your ship and I couldn't stop you." He paused. "But I'm asking you not to. I'm asking you to let me show you something first. And then if you still want to take me, I'll go quiet and you'll have done your duty and I won't hold it against you. A man can't ask fairer than that." I should have refused. Duty was simple and the window was closing, and there was nothing on that frozen world he could show me that would change a fact written in the records of 2 governments. But I had been undone, slowly, over many evenings, by a lamp and 2 cups and 11 words, and the undoing had gone further than I knew, because I heard myself agree. I told him I would see what he had to show me. He nodded and he rose, slow and careful, and he took down a heavy coat and a lantern, the old lamp from the windowsill, and he went to the door and out into the failing light, and I followed, and behind us, for the first time in all the days I had known him, the window of the house was dark. He led me out past the eastern edge of the settlement, away from the houses, up the gentle shoulder of the valley along a path his own feet had worn in the snow over years. A single line of steps going out and coming back, out and coming back. The day was nearly gone. The little star sat low and orange and weak on the horizon, giving light but no longer any heat, and the cold came down out of the darkening sky like something with weight. He walked slowly, and I matched him, and he carried the lamp unlit in his hand, and neither of us spoke, because I understood by then that whatever he meant to show me was not a thing for talking. The path ended at a low wall, a field marked off from the fields around it, and inside the wall were the stones. Rows of them, Plain markers, your kind's way of holding a place for the dead, cut from the gray rock of the valley and set upright in lines, and the snow lay over them and between them, and there were so many. I had not known. The record said 40,000 had come and 40,000 had gone, but the records counted ships, and ships carry the living. They do not count the 11 years it took to leave, or the cold that came early some of those years, or the sickness, or the simple long arithmetic of a colony where people are born and grow old and die the way people do everywhere, in every place they have ever made into a home. The colony had not only lived on Ardenfield, it had buried its dead there, generations of them. And when the living finally lifted off into the dark, they had left the dead behind, because the dead cannot be carried 4 jumps to a green world, and because the living had to choose, and they chose to go on living, the way my people would have chosen, the way anyone with sense would choose. They left them. They had no choice but to leave them. And one old man with a granddaughter on a green world and a door that was always open, had looked at the empty world and the rows of stones and decided that leaving them was the one thing he would not do. He went among the stones the way you walk through a room full of sleeping children, careful of his steps, and he stopped before the markers and he said their names, not for me, I think, but because saying them was part of the thing he had stayed to do. Harold Vance, who built the meeting hall, the Okonkwo family all in a row the fever year. Sela Ramos, the schoolteacher who he said had taught half the valley to read, including him, late, when he was already a grown man and ashamed of it. He knew everyone. He had been keeping them, you understand, clearing the snow from the stones, saying the names so the names would still be said somewhere in the universe, keeping a light in a window at the edge of their field so that the place where they slept would not, on top of everything else, also be dark and empty and forgotten. Somebody ought to be home when it gets dark. He had not been talking about the house. He had never once been talking about the house. He came at last to 2 stones set a little apart near the wall, where the lamp's reach would touch them first when it was lit. He knelt down in the snow, slow, his old knees protesting, and he brushed the white from the faces of the 2 markers with a hand that knew them better than it knew anything left alive. And he was quiet for a long while. And then, without turning to look at me, he told me. His wife was under one of them, Eleanor. They had come out to Ardenfield together when it was young and the fields were green and the star was a lie everyone still believed, and they had farmed the shoulder of the valley for 40 years, and she had died in the cold thinning in the slow years, and he had put her in the ground himself when the ground would still take a spade. And the smaller stone beside hers, the one his hand kept returning to, was their daughter, Cora, 6 years old. The first hard winter, the one that came a decade before its time, the one that warned the colony of everything that was coming and that no one had wanted to hear. 6 years old, he said, and then he said nothing for a while, and the little star slid the last of the way below the horizon, and the dark came down over the field of stones, complete and patient and absolute, the dark that the whole world was sinking into, the dark his people had fled and he had stayed inside. Everyone told me to go, he said finally, into that dark. My granddaughter, the captains, they all said the same thing you said. There's nothing here, it's just a husk now. There's no sense in it, and they're right. There's no sense in it. He looked up and I could barely see him, only the shape of an old man kneeling between 2 stones at the end of a world. But sense isn't the only thing a person has to answer to. I held my wife's hand for 40 years and my girls for 6, and then I put them both in this ground with my own hands, and the rest of the world climbed into ships and left them to the cold and the dark with nobody to say their names. And I couldn't, that's all. I'm not brave and I'm not mad and I'm not guarding anything. I just couldn't be one more person who left them. So I stayed, to keep the light on, so that for as long as I last, this isn't a place that everybody abandoned. It's a place where somebody stayed. He reached up then, and he lit the lamp. The match flared gold in the great dark, and the wick caught, and the small steady flame pushed back the night just far enough to touch the 2 stones nearest the wall, just far enough to put a little warmth on the names. And he set the lamp down in the snow between them, and he stayed there on his knees in the cold beside his wife and his daughter, an old man keeping his family company at the end of all things, and I stood behind him, a creature with no word for home, and felt the word arrive in me at last, too large and too late, breaking open a place in me I had not known a veil possessed. I did not take him. I want you to know that. I had the authority and the window was closing and I did not use it. I knelt down beside him in the snow, which is not a thing my body is shaped to do and which I did anyway, and I stayed with him until the cold drove us both back to the small warm room with the stove and the 2 cups, and in the morning I lit the lamp myself and carried it to the window, and he watched me do it, and he did not say anything, but he put his old hand on one of my limbs for a moment, and that was all the thanks either of us needed. I called off the salvage. I logged Ardenfield as a world unfit for recovery, instrument failure, total loss, a small lie that cost the concern a little money and cost me nothing I valued. My crew did not understand, and I did not explain, because there are things you cannot carry up to people who have not knelt in the snow. We broke orbit on the last day the window allowed, and I took my place at the port and I watched the world fall away beneath us, the gray settlement, the white fields, the field of stones I now knew was there, all of it sliding down into the dark that was swallowing that whole small dying star and everything that had ever circled it. And there at the eastern edge, smaller than small, swallowed almost at once by the rising night, I saw the lamp, one warm gold light in one window of one house on a world that everyone in the universe had agreed to call empty, burning on purpose, lit by an old man who could have left and did not, so that the place where his wife and his daughter slept would not be, on top of everything else, also a place where nobody came home when it got dark. We climbed into the long black and the light shrank to a point and the point went out, lost in the curve of the dying world, and I do not know whether it had truly gone dark or only passed beyond the reach of even veil eyes, and it does not matter, because I know that for as long as Tomas Brennan drew breath he lit it again every evening, and someone was home, and the place was not abandoned because he was there. You ask me why the humans stayed on a planet everyone else abandoned. I have crossed more dead skis than there are stars in yours, and I have left 100 worlds without a backward glance, and I will tell you the truth I learned kneeling in that snow, the truth my whole, long, lightless people had managed to live without. The world was not what he stayed for. The world was just the ground. He stayed for the ones in the ground, and for the promise that you do not leave the people you love alone in the dark, not for sense, not for survival, not for anything you can carry to the next sun. He stayed because to a human a place is not a husk to be stripped and shed. It is made holy by who you have buried in it, and a holy place is never empty as long as one living thing remembers to keep a light in the window. We do not have a word for that. We are going to need one. Because I have seen it now, the thing your kind do that no instrument of mine could measure and no theory of mine could hold, and I am old and I have decided, the way he decided, against all the sense my people raised me on. When my time comes, I am not going to die in the dark between the stars like every veil before me. I am going to ask them to carry me back to a small cold world with a field of stones on the shoulder of a valley, and I am going to lie down among names I learned to say, near a man who taught me what the word means, and I am going to keep a light in the window. Somebody ought to be home when it gets dark.